There we go. Great. Hello, everyone. It's Thursday, January 27th, 2022, and I'm very pleased that you can join us today for this latest episode of the Time for a Hand Up podcast. My name is Jeff Moore, and I'm the founder and host. And I wanted to put this together because for myself, having had a lived experience, a mental health challenge, which hospitalized me for 5 weeks, almost a decade ago, when my first entrepreneurial venture didn't work out. I thought that it would be important to be able to share my story and give a platform for people who have either had lived experiences, who are caregivers, who are involved in finding solutions through their businesses or otherwise, for people who right now are basically pinned with mental health challenges. And so, and sometimes my guests have all three of those areas covered. So this is all about authentic discussions, trying to reach out to people to make sure that people know you are not alone. And I also originally called this the Pinned Podcast because it occurred to me that, there's a lot of stigma still, unfortunately, in certain circles about mental health issues and challenges. And the fact is, both physical and mental health are intrinsic core aspects of being alive for everyone. And I created this little exercise in the gym where people can take the lightest weight, which is just the bench press 45-pound bar. And it doesn't matter if you're the strongest man or woman in the world, the toughest man or woman in the world, or anybody. The fact is, you will all eventually have the same result in this exercise. You would do as many repetitions as you can until not stopping at the top, but stopping at the bottom when you can no longer get this 45-pound weight off of your chest. And I was told in the hospital and reminded by my doctor, which was very helpful to me. He said, Jeff, everyone in the world has a breaking point and you found yours. And so the analogy with the weight, if you think about the mental health challenges that people are trying to deal with, which creates an incredible stress and load on them, it adds to other pressures in life. All of this, we're all the same at our core. We're all human. We can only take so much. We all need a hand up at times, and we need to be able to have these conversations with people. So that's really the background, and it's a huge pleasure for me today to introduce everybody to Rob Pintwala. And Rob is the founder of First Session, has had his own lived experiences and rich stories to tell. And so anyway, Rob, it's a great pleasure to have you join today, and I look forward to having a great conversation this morning.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, thank you for having me.
And so, Rob, maybe just to kick it off, if you want to introduce yourself a bit and talk about a bit of your journey, and then we can get into more specifics about First Session and other related topics, so that people viewing this again can get an idea of the great help that your organization brings to the table. And also, as a reminder to everybody, they're not alone. They should not allow anyone to ever stigmatize them, because we're all human and we can all use a hand up at times.
Yeah, sure. Please stop me if I ramble too much. So I live in Toronto, Canada. I am 31 years old, and in 2019 I started a company called First Session. First Session helps people find the right therapist or counselor for them. It's in Canada right now. It's a website, and really what's sparked this idea for me, and how I came up here, how I showed up to this point. I experienced a couple of years in my early adulthood of depression, and I have always had a keen interest on psychology and how the brain works. And over the years, I've learned more about, trauma and family intergenerational challenges, and, how everything of that nature can come together to affect a person. So I'm super passionate about mental health, about helping people address their mental health and, focus on wellness. And my business is evolved around that. So to get a little bit more into detail, I graduated from high school. I was an athlete. I was a very sort of competitive, high performer, I guess you could say. I played competitive hockey and then football and lacrosse. I graduated high school sort of, I guess near the top of my class. And then I went to school in Montreal. Actually, I went to McGill, and I showed up to McGill, and I was all of a sudden kind of nobody. I tried out for the sports team that I thought I might have the best chance of making. Didn't quite make it. That was lacrosse, and then I was looking for my friends. I had a few folks that I knew there, but really found myself alone. And I think mostly, like, I didn't realize this till several years later. Uh, when I was in my final year of high school, my parents divorced, and that at the time I was in denial that was affecting me. But in hindsight, it definitely had a huge effect on me. So I was the youngest. I'm the youngest child of three boys, and a very tight family, very great childhood, and kind of had this vision of this perfect family unit that was really dismantled to my surprise. And then sort of the after effects of that, trying to sort of find a new identity for the family. So that combined with being in a new place and trying to meet new friends, and then a little bit of probably more alcohol use than is healthy. And that definitely just set me into a hole. And so that was a hole that I found myself in, that I really, the main thing I took away, it's easy to speak clearly now, but I was in this place for about 2 years, and then for a few years after, I was kind of on the edge of it. I really can understand what it means to be stuck and not be able to get out of that place. I'm a kind of a type A, I guess you could say. I kind of push for things that I want, and that was my attempt to to get out of this dark place, was to kind of push forward and to like whatever, like exercise more, or push myself harder. And that definitely just did not work. It actually backfired. So yeah, I think where I'm at now is I've really just learned that you can't control, like for years afterwards. I think in my third year of university, I started feeling much better. I changed my environment a little bit. I did an exchange. I met some new people, and I kind of distanced myself from home, which helped. But really, what helped kind of free me is to understand that you can't control. Like I can't. I was so afraid of being depressed again afterwards, that I was living with like this added anxiety that was actually like controlling my life, in a sense where I thought I could, like I was, I thought I was good at preventing myself from falling down into this dark place. But that left me like hyper anxious. And I was usually, quite a sentimental person. Sort of, I would be able to have deep conversations with, anyone. And I do enjoy these types of conversations now, again, finally. But for a while, I just wouldn't like scratch the surface. I would only scratch the surface, rather. And I wouldn't get too deep out of fear of being lost in the depths. So after that, for several years, and just experiences and support from friends and family, and a few visits to counselors, I finally kind of realized that this is a little bit out of my control. Hey, if I get depressed again, um, that's a little bit out of my control, and it's living without the fear of being depressed is better for me at this point. So and so far so good. That's been, it's been about 12 years or so since I was feeling quite down. I'm one of the lucky ones. A lot of people don't kind of see the other side of that. And I think there are several reasons to that. So quickly fast forward, I graduated. I wanted a good job. I didn't know what I was doing. I tried several different jobs at these high growth tech companies. I moved to Vancouver for 5 years. I joined a fast growing company. You know, always wanted to do something entrepreneurial, and I moved back to Toronto and joined another company, which ended up I got fired from, and then soon after the company folded and failed. So that gave me some time to say, hey, like, what do I actually want to do? I finally took a break after about 7-8 years in the workforce, and a few months before that, my wife had an experience of trying to find a therapist, which was very did not result in finding a therapist. It really turned her off the search. So that motivated me to start First Session, and it was actually her idea and resulted from a conversation with my wife and one of her friends. And at the time, I was miserable in my job. I ended up getting fired, and so I went for it, and it started very slow, and it's about 3 years later now, and we've helped about 3,000 Canadians connect with a
Awesome.
therapist. Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah.
Let me ask you. So you mentioned, like, you talked about basically self-talk, and at different times your concern or you're being afraid of, opening up to different discussions because you didn't want to get back into the depression. And I think self-talk is a huge issue, and is another massive reason why people need to get help from organizations such as yours, and reach out to others in their circle, and not be afraid of getting the hand up. I mean, I know for sure in my experiences, it seems to compound itself, because that goes a little bit back to the analogy I'm trying to use about, the bench press. If you come into the gym and you do your first few reps, it's very easy, you're fine, right? And but when the load is like you're just struggling with it all the time, depending on your mindset and also your state of mental health, the self-talk can wear you down even more. So I just wanted to ask you a bit about the self-talk bit, and also maybe how it also ties into, First Session.
Yeah. Self-talk is huge from what I see for people. Self-talk and self-esteem, self-worth, self-love, self-compassion, self-care. It's all kind of related.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think my personal experience, I think when I was feeling depressed and kind of that kind of lonely lack of motivation, more so just lack of joy. Like I couldn't be, I felt like I'm already kind of a serious person, but I felt like I had this weight on my shoulders or my chest that just didn't allow me to kind of get to the level of excitement, or like, it was like I wasn't allowed to experience that joy. And if I did, I had to fake it if I was at a social outing. So I think what I kind of tried to do was actually like kind of push myself to the limit, where because wasn't feeling the kind of full spectrum of emotions, like I was kind of I had a mask on, the full range of emotions. I would kind of stress myself out and do things that were kind of, risky, like stay up all night and study for an exam, and literally not go to sleep, and or drink a whole whatever it took to lose my memory, and then just to kind of like try to feel something. And I think like that kind of can send you spinning, and the self-talk that kind of happens from, maybe you hit some sort of like temporarily level that's just falsely inflated by whether it's a substance or lack of sleep or just pushing yourself. And then on the other end of it, you feel even worse because you can't sustain that. So I think the self-talk there was like I was lucky because I knew there's a few instances where I looked at my life and I said, like, I'm a privileged, I'm like, I have so much opportunity. I'm at one of the best schools in the country. And, I have all this opportunity. Like my life should be good, but I don't feel good. So that was the confusing part for me, in terms of that, like, self-reflection. So that those thoughts were kind of fleeting. Like that didn't, I wasn't like every day I'm like, I should feel good. It was more like once in a while, it's like, why can't I stop feeling poorly? And I think, to be honest, like the memory of the specific self talk is blurry. I think that's actually part of my like coping mechanism, to like not remember that well.
Right.
So I can't actually recall some of the exact kind of things I'd say to myself, but I know it wasn't great.
And that's probably a good thing, right? As we move forward and try to move back to being who we would like to be and who we are and looking towards the future. Um, I had the chance just this morning, actually, you wrote a beautiful letter to your son, Cameron, who's just, I believe 2 months old. And I was wondering if
Mm.
you'd be willing to share a bit more or talk a bit about, what you put into the letter and you're sharing with your 2 month old about your experiences and hope for his future.
Yeah. Well, I have to give credit to one of my colleagues for coming up with the idea. So it wasn't my idea. I did write the letter though. Wanting to share more personal experience, and I think directing it to my newborn son, who's 2 months old now, really gave me a chance to think about, what partly because I'm a father, and men in particular have trouble reaching out or admitting that they're struggling still, um, but mostly to kind of tie together the progress that we've made as a family, and I think as society somewhat, but also kind of throw a stake in the ground and say, hey, like, directed at my son to let him know that if he's struggling, it's okay, and we're here for him. And like, I've struggled. I shared a little bit about my struggle. I shared, there's been several family members that have struggled in my family, but my grandfather would have, the most maybe um, traditional case of like trauma and PTSD from World War II. So my grandfather on my mother's side actually attempted suicide. You know, probably 15, 20 years after the war. And it was in two sentences in his memoirs at the very end of them. So that's kind of the goal of the letter, was to say, we've come a long way. A few generations ago, someone writing a several hundred page memoirs would include their suicide attempt at the very end in two sentences. uh, and the wording was something like, not something to dwell on, but not something I'm, proud of. So, just the amount of shame in terms of like in my direct family of mental health struggles, whether or not it's nature versus nurture, like, is it genetic or is it from experience? That doesn't really matter. The point I was trying to make is, if you're struggling, um, don't struggle alone.
Yeah.
And not only is there support in my family, but there is a lot of support out there for anyone who is struggling, if they decide to reach out.
Yeah. My own father was a World War II vet, and he passed away 30 years ago, but I do have some info that my mom wrote down from his diaries, etc. And there were times which he supposedly would wake up in the middle of the night and be panicked because he thought that the Jeep in front of him was blowing up, because he'd actually seen that and lived that. And to me, it's
Mhm.
incredibly ironic that, your grandfather, my father, and other people who served, they served in a selfless way for a massive cause so that we could live, in freedom, et cetera. And yet they paid a massive price. So it's ironic that, they would feel the shame of how far it took them. But I think it's very understandable. I never lived that myself, those particular issues at all, but it comes back to they deserve the help, they deserve the chance, as everybody does, but they went through so much. So
Yeah, I think it's very, very common for people to downplay their own experiences because, we still have relatives that fought in a war, or You know, anything that we're experiencing doesn't seem as bad as someone out there who experienced something, you know, maybe objectively more harsh or more challenging. But you know, that is not the that is that is not the effective way
Right.
to take care of yourself.
Yes.
If you know, so many people, you know, I think men have a tendency to do this, but anyone really will put off seeking help because they, and this is part of self-talk, you know, they think that whatever they're experiencing can't be as bad, and the resources out there should be used for more severe cases. And you
Right.
know, but everyone's experience is unique to them.
Yeah. I agree with you 1,000%. And again, I'm going to go back to my simple analogy again. But you know, if you are you know, an NFL football player, CFL football player, obviously you're a very strong person. But you know, it's how much can the individual carry? You know, so each, like you say, each person, each human being has to recognize their limitations and the overwhelming struggles that they may have at any given time. So I agree with you 1,000%. Again, this is not, there's no competition here. It's about each individual living healthy lives and realizing there are times when they need, you know, they need to reach out and they need to open up, and then they help others and help themselves at that same time. I wanted to ask you, or sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just the only additional thought on that is I think there's, you know, there's a lot of you know, hype around, like with, I guess, my, you know, millennial age group right now, or even the Gen Z. You know, self-care is this big buzz term, right? And I think a lot of companies kind of capitalize on self-care and try to sell you products that, you know, will take care of yourself. But really, I think a lot of people are kind of raised to, again, speak down to themselves. They speak worse to themselves than they would to their friends or their family.
Right, that's
But I think really what like, you are basically investing in your own health
yes.
in order to show up better for others. Like, you know, the whole airplane oxygen mask analogy, like you really do have to help yourself before you can help others. Like, there are opportunities for you to help others if you are hurt. You know, a lot of people that help others are hurt. But I think to live kind of a sustainable life, giving back to others, you do need to look after yourself.
Right. No, very well said. I want to ask you about COVID and the kind of times we're living in, and how you feel that that may be, you know, challenging people even more, and then possibly, you know, leading to more people coming to first session, or just any observations on the times we're living in, and the, you know, some of the isolation, I guess, that people are having from their normal human interactions.
Yeah, really good question. Our number one sort of core value and, you know, mission for a session is to help people create meaningful human connection. And you know, we do that through connecting people with a therapist, but there's many ways to have a meaningful human connection. COVID has stripped us from a lot of meaningful human connection that we're reliant on and actually need to be healthy and function as a society. So there's all these other, you know, secondary effects, but I think that's the number one thing is, you know, stripping us from meaningful human connection, but also like layering on this level of anxiety and fear and guilt, or around, you know, new rules and different sets of rules for different, you know, areas that you hear about on the news. But then you have this accumulation of technology. Again, I can speak to my generation, and I think maybe generation that's younger. We're all stuck at home. Those of us who are fortunate enough to have homes, and we have our devices, and our devices, we're reliant on them to connect with one another. But the devices are also these very well engineered machines to like suck our attention from us. And there's a lot more literature these days on dopamine, which you know, is like a neurotransmitter, I believe. But you know, basically these devices are giving us little dopamine hits, which is little experiences of pleasure, and it's addictive. And really, we have this combination of social isolation and then like an over reliance on our devices. And, the lack of connection is bad for our mental health, but also this like our dopamine system is like out of whack, and our, maybe especially, when it's harder to exercise, or, it's harder to have the motivation to eat healthy. And so you have all these, accumulating factors that are making people struggle. People are working from home. There's less boundaries around when you're working, when you're not working. Your kids are at home for people like that. It's so difficult. But I think ultimately, it's the lack of human connection that I personally miss, and I think most people are really having to sit with themselves more than they'd like to, and it's allowing a lot of unpleasant thoughts to come up that might not have come up if COVID didn't happen.
And with first session, for example, are then most of the dialogues virtual?
Good question. Yeah. So when we started, actually, I wasn't thinking online therapy primarily. There are a lot of apps out there to see a therapist, and I think a lot of people that I were interviewing when I started first session, and my circle is kind of in this software, technology industry circle. So a lot of these folks are working with software every day, but many of them told me I would never see a therapist online, or I'd never see a counselor online. So, I was like, okay, well, let's actually like plot everyone on a map. Let me partner with these therapists. And, what I do is I interview them all and shoot videos of them to help facilitate that connection, because that connection is like very, very critical in therapy, having a connection with your therapist. And people can book with them, directly. So at first it was majority in-person sessions when I launched, but as soon as COVID hit, every therapist that I work with, if they didn't already offer online sessions, now they do. There's so many tools that will allow you to do that, like Zoom or something else. And it's really sped up the adoption for clients or patients to seek therapy online. It's really like, because we're doing everything online, it's really accelerated that. So, for my business, it sped up our growth, because we could advertise to more people, because we didn't have to advertise to people in a 5-kilometer radius, to the therapist. We could advertise to, the whole province or territory.
And have you had challenges to find like a large number of excellent therapists? Because sometimes I hear that, out there, the demand is high. And so, it's sometimes there's the long waiting list, or it's hard to find them. I think from what I can see, part of what you're providing is obviously access to a range of high quality therapists who would connect well with certain types of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. I think overall the demand likely does outweigh the supply. But that being said, so in Canada and also in the US, I believe, there is a public health system, and then which is funded by the government or sometimes nonprofits, and things of that nature. And then there's the private sector. Unfortunately, mental health care for the vast majority of people is not covered by our, provincial universal health care. So because of that, these therapists are similar to a chiropractor or massage therapist or acupuncturist, those types of professions. They're all sort of running their own businesses. There is a large number that either work in a hospital or work, as I mentioned, like at a community organization. So when you look at the mental health care market, it's very big and it's fragmented. And I think when most people think about these wait lists and all this, like any public funded mental health support network is typically very hard to access, at least immediately. What they have to do is they have to prioritize the people who are in crisis. So the hospitals are a point of access for people who are in crisis. Then the hospitals have, outpatient type services. But anyone else who is not in absolute crisis is likely going to have to wait for months, and likely, sometimes actually even more than a year, with depending on what they're trying to access. So There is a huge component of mental health care that is private, and if you have an employer that you're fortunate enough to have insurance or group benefits, oftentimes it covers a portion of psychotherapy. So that's the market that we play in. Public therapy is all controlled by the government, and they do their own advertising, so they wouldn't hire a company like mine to advertise for them. So we work for private practice therapists, and within that market, there is still a lot of people that, like, there's a lot of inefficiency. There's a lot of very outdated ways to find a therapist. The most common way to find a therapist still today, if you're looking online, is basically this website that feels like Facebook 10, 15 years ago. You have every therapist with a little profile page. They upload a photo of themselves. They write several paragraphs about what they do and what their style is. Just recently, they have a little video feature where they can post like a 10-second video. But many therapists don't update whether they're accepting clients or not. You can't book with them directly. So you have to end up messaging 5 or 10 therapists. Many of them don't respond. So people, the motivation for me starting First Session was because you're exhausted already when you're trying to find a therapist. So that search should be easy. And that's what we do at First Session. We make that search easy, and we make the ability to assess the therapist on an individual basis easy.
And if a new person was to contact you, I assume they go through your website typically, and if they were to contact you and want to engage you for your services, how long typically does it take before they could have a meeting with a therapist that you've kind of identified as maybe being optimal for them, given their background and personality, or the different criteria that you would look at? How long would that?
Yeah, good question. So there'll be therapists on the website right now that you can book tomorrow.
Okay.
Right, for an intake or First Session. So I should add that our website, my belief is that people have the best. It's proven that the number one factor in success in therapy is the relationship between the client and the therapist. So that's the most important thing. So you could find a therapist that's got all the experience that you think you need, based on whether you're experiencing anger, or whether you can't sleep, or whatever it is. But if they're not a good fit, kind of soft skills and personality wise, if they rub you the wrong way, if you don't like the sound of their voice, if you don't think they can identify with your culture and they don't understand your background, that's not going to lead to an effective outcome, most likely. So we sort of solve for all those soft skills, and we rely on the individual to assess for themselves while creating an environment to make it easy to say, okay, oh, I'm feeling anxious, I'm going to search for anxiety, and I'm going to watch a bunch of videos and choose who I think I can relate to. Right. And then we rely on the therapists, who are all trained and licensed and have designations in their particular province that they exist in. The therapists can then do the screening and say, okay, is my experience the best fit for this client? Almost all the time it is. The odd time it might not be, and they would refer out. But the traditional model of like a clinic is, if you call a clinic, you talk to an intake coordinator, and an intake coordinator is maybe a junior person that isn't quite a therapist yet. So they'll talk to you for 15 minutes. They'll ask you a whole bunch of questions. And then they say, okay, based on what you said, I think you're best, would be best suited for this counselor or this counselor. So then you need to go to that counselor whenever they're available. And basically, for everything I heard from these therapists, if you're doing an intake with like a centralized coordinator, or if you're using another website that has an intake process, you're going to be doing that intake over again with the therapist. Even though that therapist sees your notes from that intake, Rob is depressed, Rob can't sleep. They're going to ask you those same questions. You're going to need to tell your story again, which is also exhausting. So my whole model is, the intake is going to be repeated anyways. Might as well cut out this, minimize the number of times you need to tell your story, because it's exhausting as it is, right, and go direct to the therapist. Right. Yeah.
Okay. A question about stigma. Are you optimistic in terms of the dialogue in society? And we're talking about different generations, like I'm older than you are. And so you were talking about your generation, a younger generation. How do you feel about stigma and how we're moving forward to, more openness and willingness to share and make sure that people are feeling that they're not afraid of it, that they're just afraid of not taking care of themselves.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's moving in the right direction. I think there's a lot of momentum behind being able to be more open, but I think it's very fragmented, and it depends on the community that you're in. Like, we're all part of a number of communities, and I might be a very open person, but if I work for a company that's not very open around this kind of stuff, then I'm gonna hide parts of myself at that company or at that school or on that sports team or whatever. So I think it's very community based as far as stigma, and I think it's up to each community to really fight for it's challenging too, though. So at a high performing company, there's kind of a balance between how much openness do you have for mental health, and do you treat do you sort of treat people differently based on whether they have a mental health challenge or a mental illness diagnosis or not. So it's very challenging, but I do think the stigma, like all of these conversations are happening. Part of the work that we do at First Session is actually coming into companies and talking about this kind of stuff to help move the conversation along. But I do think, like, we'll know that the stigma is gone when people stop saying, it was very courageous of you to share that, or because it's I still, after writing that letter yesterday to my son and sharing that, a lot of people said, it's very, very courageous of you to share. And I think that until it's not considered courageous to share, then the stigma still exists.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. That's a great point. So once again, if people would like to learn more, what is the website? Is that where they would go? Like, is it firstsession.ca, or how would they
Yeah, firstsession.com. Yeah, so it's a directory, and you'll find a therapist in there. Right now, we work in Canada, and we have 2 provinces that we have therapists in right now. But very soon, we're actually going to open it up to the whole country, and because therapy is ultimately under the healthcare kind of banner, there is some nuance around, if you're living in Quebec, you might need to see someone who's either in Quebec or licensed to see you in Quebec. Same with Ontario, Manitoba. So if you're looking for a therapist, firstsession.com, and any sort of region that you are living in, you'll see some therapists that are licensed to see you.
That's great. And is there anything else that you'd want to share or discuss as we kind of wrap up our conversation this morning? These are hugely important topics, and congratulations to you and your team and your family for what you're doing to help other people. And I hope some people who see this will indeed reach out. But is there anything else you'd like to mention or discuss or anything? Or
Yeah, maybe, the last thing I'll mention is that I think therapy and seeking out help, all these things have been shaped by our previous knowledge of mental health, and mental health care in the healthcare setting has come a long way. And I think there's a whole bunch of different areas within mental health care, or maybe not even considered mental health care, like performance coaching, for example, that is more so about getting you to the level of optimal performance and optimal living, instead of just kind of helping you heal from whatever is burdening you. So I think that's what I'd like to add, is that if someone thinks that they're feeling pretty good, and have a pretty good handle on their state of being, as far as their mental health goes, if you're still looking to live a more fulfilling life, there are lots of therapists out there that, if you create a good connection with them, they can really help you kind of start to flourish and start to really live a life of more meaning and, maybe, align with your goals in your career and your relationship. So I think, therapy can help people recover from a very challenging time or circumstance, but can also really help lift people up and start to kind of fly. So I think that's something that's not really talked about too much. And I think for people who are fortunate enough to have those benefits through their work, I think really, you can access those types of services partially funded by your company, and you can really start to focus on, living optimally.
Right. Fantastic. Great thoughts to end the discussion. So thanks everybody for listening today. I hope you enjoyed this Time for a Hand Up podcast and that you'll tune in for future ones as well. And thanks very much, Rob. It's great talking to you.
Thank you very much for having me. It was great to be here.
Thanks.